Good evening, Patriots, and welcome to another edition of the Douglas Ducote Show. You had many places to be tonight. Chose to be here with me, and for that, I am forever grateful. Thank you very, very much. We have a lot to discuss tonight, and I'll tell you what, it is a very, very interesting past 24 hours, to say the least. Let me start by saying that during my reporting of the New Orleans and Las Vegas terrorist attacks that took place on New Year's Day, I made a point of telling you that this is a very fluid situation and the beginning of an investigation. So as more and more is known, things will change. And what we have seen change in the New Orleans attack is the FBI is now saying there were no other people involved. He had no accomplices. He was a lone wolf. This is after saying that 3 men and 1 woman were seen on video placing IEDs around the city before the attack took place. Now they're saying it was just people that noticed the coolers that the IEDs were inside of and were just curious and therefore checking them out. Although no one thought that they were a possible IED bomb ready to detonate and use their phone to call 911 or flag down cops or anything like that. They just chose to look in it and walk away. Very interesting, if you ask me. Then, after saying the New Orleans terrorist set his Airbnb on fire, which we know he stayed in, then said that it probably wasn't him because the fire started, the call to the fire department was after the terrorist attack had already started taking place. So it couldn't have been him that set the Airbnb on fire. That's pretty interesting. So based on that, you don't consider that maybe he used some type of a detonating device so he could get out of the Airbnb and away from the Airbnb before it caught on fire or whatever caused it to catch on fire? You know, like the detonating devices that you said you found in his vehicle that were connected to the coolers that had the IEDs in them, so he could then set them off. This is the type thing that makes normal Americans think that the FBI is incompetent. And this is the kind of thing that causes us to lose trust in the FBI. After all, you've already said that this guy had the activating devices for the coolers, for the IEDs, and then couldn't have had one that had anything to do with the fire at the Airbnb. So that is the latest. Again, very fluid situation. Things are changing. I do believe that in just a few days, let's see, on the 20th, we will have a FBI director and a Department of Justice director and new leadership at the Homeland Security, people that actually give a damn about Americans and America, that will look deeper into this. And those that are currently leading the investigation will probably kind of get reassigned somewhere. If all that wasn't bad enough, today, CNN, and I did not catch who this guy's name. It was a male that was a congressman in New Orleans. I did not catch his name, but I will tell you what I remember the conversation about because I was like glued to it when I heard it. First realized what they were talking about. I was driving, came on the radio, and I was like, what are you serious? And I didn't have time to check and see who it was they had spoke to earlier or who this guy was. But I'll tell you what he said. The CNN person asked him to listen to what Donald Trump had to say and what Speaker Johnson had to say in regards to our southern border. Because in the beginning of all this, we were told that the FBI and through Customs and Security had video footage of the vehicle that the New Orleans terrorist was driving come across our southern border. I think it was around Eagle Pass. And they didn't know who was driving the vehicle. Now, of course, we've since found out that the vehicle was used, it was rented, and who knows who was in the vehicle when it went to Mexico and came back. All right. May or may not have been him. But regardless, that doesn't matter. And why does it not matter? Because we know what's happening on our southern border. We know for a fact that Border Patrol has been apprehending people coming across that border illegally that are on the terrorist no-fly list. They've already arrested like 150 known terrorists that came across our southern border. It's wide open thanks to this current administration. So the frustration in the beginning of all this, with the FBI saying this vehicle was captured on video coming from Mexico into America, and them thinking that that's how the terrorists got here, then it turns out that this guy was actually an American citizen and was from Texas. Then all of a sudden, let's slam Trump and Speaker Johnson for talking about the border. And so after they played the little 2 bits of them talking about how unsecure the border was, this congressman then talked about how irresponsible it was for Trump and for Speaker Johnson to interject politics into the terrorist attacks and to talk about our southern border, which, is secure, and that there's no problem with our southern border when it comes to terrorists. Is that this guy's clueless. I was livid listening to this guy as I was driving. Again, I didn't catch his name, didn't have a chance to look it up a while ago before the show started, but I will look into it. I will let you know at the next show more information about him. Hell, if I can find if there was an actual clip of it, of him talking about it, other than what I heard on the radio, I'll be happy to share that with you as well. But I'm sure you can look it up on whatever social media site you're using, or YouTube or Rumble or what have you, and hear this interview. What I will say to that interview is that for 4 years now, FBI Director Christopher Wray has been going in front of our Congress every month for many different reasons. And every time he tells them, I've reported on it many times, that we have the highest threat level of terrorists coming across our southern border and cells in America waiting to do damage to us than ever in our history. And this administration and Democrat members of Congress refused to listen to him. They refused to do anything about what he was saying. They refused to understand that Border Patrol is catching known terrorists coming across that southern border. So for this incompetent idiot, and there's many of them in Congress, to go that direction in his little interview today, just showed how dangerous the situation is in Congress with the people that we have running this country, because we know what's happening on that border. I was down there doing documentaries on that border 4 years ago, sharing with you what we were seeing. And we knew that people from Muslim countries were coming across. We showed you some of the garb that they left behind. We interviewed Border Patrol and the Border Patrol union representative, who was saying that, you know what, we keep hearing from members of Congress and the Democrat Party up in Washington, D.C. that, oh, you've only caught, a few known terrorists. And that was at that time when we interviewed him 4 years ago. And he said, well, guess what? It only takes one to make a very bad day. So do you need to catch 20 or 150 like they've already caught? I think it's actually more than 150. I believe it's up to over 200. And then we know that over 2 million gotaways come across that border. So how many terrorists were mixed into that crowd that are in America right now waiting to kill you and me? According to FBI Director Christopher Wray, it's a bunch. And he said that's what keeps him up at night, is knowing that terrorists have come across that southern border. So for any member of Congress to try and downplay our southern border, now that we know that this terrorist was actually an American citizen, is an injustice to all of us. It's a slap in the face because we know the situation with that border. 90% of the reason why Donald Trump is now going to be sworn into office in a few days is because of that border. Okay, so moving on. So New Year's morning, radical Islamic terrorist drove his truck through a crowd of people celebrating the start of New Year's in New Orleans. 15 people were murdered and more than 35 injured. But maybe this tragedy could have been avoided if the FBI spent less time targeting parents, Catholics, and countless other people instead of focusing its resources on catching actual terrorists. This terrorist, Jabbar, plowed through the crowd in his rented Ford F-150 Lightning EV truck draped with an ISIS flag before shooting at police officers who fatally shot and killed him. Jabbar recently converted to Islam and began acting erratic in the last few months, according to family and friends. This was put out in the New York Times earlier today. Unfortunately, under the leadership of this FBI director, Christopher Wray, the FBI was too busy doing things like helping to orchestrate a kidnapping plot targeting Democrat Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer to catch a terrorist. Here are some others the FBI was too busy targeting while terrorists became radicalized on U.S. soil. Catholics. Documents obtained by House Republicans in 2023 reveal multiple FBI field officers were involved in the drafting of the infamous memo that labeled Catholics as potential domestic terrorists. A leaked FBI memo revealed a Richmond, Virginia field office was investigating alleged white supremacy connected to Catholics who attend Latin Mass. The memo warned of radical transitionalized Catholics and noted possible infiltration into Catholic communities using various kinds of informants. Substantial memos showed the FBI field offices in Los Angeles and Portland were involved in targeting Catholics, Trump supporters. Jabbar reportedly began radicalized in recent months. But the FBI wouldn't have caught on to that because around the same time that this terrorist was being radicalized, the FBI was singling out Trump supporters. A report from Newsweek plainly states, as well as many other organizations in the media, Newsweek reported that nearly 2/3 of the FBI's current investigations are focused on Trump supporters accused of violating anti-riot laws. After January 6th, the FBI expanded its anti-government or anti-authoritarian violent extremist order category to jumpstart investigations to Americans based on their political affiliations. As my colleague Joy Boyd reported, more than a year later, the FBI created this category, which devoted its resources to monitor anyone the agency deemed an anti-government domestic violent extremist with seemingly advised political affiliations. Newsweek reported that while Trump supporters were not officially designated as members of this category, government insiders acknowledged that it applies to political violence ascribed to the former president's supporters. That would be you and me, MAGA as fuck. And senior intelligence officials within the FBI believe Trump's army constitutes the greatest threat of violence domestically, politically. And that's the problem set, they said. Parents at school board meetings. The Department of Justice issued a memo in October of 2021 instructing the FBI to label activist parents at school board meetings with targeted tags. Threat tags. The guidance came just days after the Biden White House approved a recommendation from the National School Board Association that called for counterterrorism measures to be used against parents who spoke up at school board meetings. Attorney General Merrick Garland encouraged the use of FBI tip lines for individuals to flag parents for surveillance. Tivity Justice, co-founder of Moms for Liberty, told the Federalist of a mother who was reported to the FBI for simply being quite upset at a school board meeting when speaking about the adverse effects of quarantines and school closures. Then there's pro-lifers. During the Biden administration, the FBI targeted 55 pro-lifers for praying, singing, and evangelizing at abortion facilities across the U.S. Under the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, the Biden administration targeted pro-lifers instead of targeting terrorists, or at least 90 instances of abortion-fueled firebombing, vandalism, and other attacks on life-saving pregnancy centers, pro-life organizations, and churches. But if it was a mosque, we'd be all over that. In fact, 75-year-old Paulette Harlow was charged and found guilty of violating this act after she prayed at a Washington, D.C. abortion facility. That's all she was doing. She was outside praying. She was sentenced to 2 years in jail. The FBI has long smeared pro-lifers and called them threats, with former FBI special agent turned whistleblower Steve Friend revealing in an interview with the Tennessee Informer that the FBI showed agents a video produced by the far-left Southern Poverty Center that, according to him, ranked people who oppose abortion pro-life activities as greater threats than Islamic. Grandmas, images of how much worse Wednesday's deadly event could have been had the FBI not taken dangerous grandmas like 71-year-old Rebecca Leverez off the street. Leverez was recently convicted of 4 counts after she entered the Capitol on January 6 for roughly 10 minutes, having briefly spoken to at least one Capitol police officer prior to exiting, according to official statement of facts. She didn't break anything. She didn't hurt anybody. She didn't attack police officers. She didn't steal anything. Got 2 years in jail. 2 FBI agents showed up to her home on April 19, 2021, returning the following week for a consensual interview. and she was sentenced to 1 year probation. At least Americans can rest easy knowing threats like hers, parents at school board meetings, Trump supporters, and Catholics are off the streets. These are the kind of things that make you question, or at least me, as a veteran law enforcement officer, besides my military service, as what in the hell are we doing? And I reported on all these incidences with Merrick Garland and Homeland Security Alejandro Marcus, or however you pronounce his freaking name. It's like you can't fix stupid. And in this case, they doubled down on it. And that's pretty sad. On top of all that, law enforcement officials have confirmed that 10 people were injured yesterday in a mass shooting outside of a nightclub in Queens, New York. The New York Police Department has notified the public that the incident was not terrorist related. Fox 5 reported that a group of roughly 15 individuals were standing outside the nightclub waiting to get inside the building at approximately 11:15 p.m. last night in the Jamaican neighborhood of Queens when they were approached by 4 male individuals. 4 males were walking eastbound on 91st Avenue onto 144th Place towards the venue. Chief of Police Philip Rivera said during a press conference Wednesday after the shooting incident. 3 to 4 males then opened fire over 30 times in the direction of the group standing outside the event, striking multiple victims. Police officers were notified at roughly 11:18 p.m. that several people have been shot at the private event in Queens. Rivera confirmed that 4 male victims and 6 female victims were transported to local hospitals, were treated for non-life-threatening injuries, and were expected to recover. Law enforcement officials said the male suspects fled the scene of the crime and escaped in a light-colored sedan that had out-of-state license plate. New York Police Department told Fox News that police officials are currently searching for a gray Infiniti sedan that was last seen in the area of the shooting. While police have not yet determined a motive for Wednesday night shooting, Rivera, the police chief, told reporters this is not terrorist related. According to New York Daily News, law enforcement officials are investigating whether the shooting incident could have been caused by gang activity. Rivera said there's one of the avenues we're pursuing, but it's just early to determine right now. There's zero tolerance for these senseless shootings, these horrible acts of violence on our streets, Rivera added. Those responsible for this crime will be apprehended and brought to justice. So, Chief Rivera, I got a question for you. You have no one in custody. You have no idea even who they are. So you have no motive. But you're sure it's not an act of terrorism. How does one come to such a conclusion? Well, sir, you can't. Once again, someone in law enforcement speaking out the side of their ass about something that they just have no way of knowing. Instead, you should just say, we're investigating it to determine who's responsible. And at this time, we don't know. And if a reporter says, is it a terrorist act? Well, killing or shooting multiple people is a terrorist act. Okay, let's put that out on the table. But furthermore, if you don't know who they are, anything about them, how can you be so sure that it's not related? Why not just say, we don't know? All options are on the table. We're trying to figure this out. But no, can't get that from some people, can you? Now, this next story is probably going to maybe upset a few people that believe that it doesn't matter what you do when it comes to protest. You're covered under our Constitution to protest. And you are covered under our Constitution to protest. And I help defend your rights to the Constitution to protest. But there is a difference between peaceful protest and violent extremists trying to stir up shit and cause people to be harmed. Just as we have seen and allowed across America on college campuses, hundreds of demonstrators calling for an Antifa revolution in Times Square on New Year's Day, hours after the terrorist attack with the ISIS flag plowed into dozens at a New Year's parade in New Orleans. Attendees of the New York City protest, organized by the Palestinian Youth Movement, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and the People's Forum, according to the New York Post, were chanting, "There is only one solution, infidel revolution." In New Orleans, a group called New Orleans Musicians for Palestine is planning a procession for Palestine on January 6th. According to an Instagram post, to demonstrate our continued solidarity with the people of Palestine and to make visible our vision for a world after war, colonialism, capitalism, and white supremacy. The procession is planned outside the Louisiana Superdome on Royal Street, just a few blocks away from where this terrorist Jabbar attacked people on Bourbon Street New Year's Day. In New York, hours after the attack, protesters were chanting, "Resistance is glorious. We will be victorious. We will honor all our martyrs." And Gaza, "You make us proud." Protesters carried signs reading, "Zionist is a cancer. No war on Iran, and end all U.S. aid to Israel." The Times of Israel has been reporting on this a lot, but little with the U.S. military or with the U.S. media, although Fox covered a little bit of it. "We're sending you back to Europe, you white bitches," one woman wearing Arab garb shouted at protesters, or at people that were countering the protest, and yelling, "Go back to Europe." A speaker shouted through a megaphone that 2024 was a year of struggle against the crime of Zionism. "We will be here every single year for generation after generation until total liberation and return," that speaker said. So these protests, as far as I'm concerned, need to be stopped. They're not peaceful, which is what our Constitution allows. Peaceful protest. Calling for the death of Jews, calling for Israel to be wiped off the face of the map, calling for death to America, shouting support for terrorism, and threatening Jewish students is not okay, nor is it covered under our U.S. Constitution. I'm calling for a stop to any protest that involves supporting any known terrorist organizations, such as Hamas, Hezbollah, or ISIS. Any protest that defaces our monuments and buildings, as we've seen in all these protests, where they're spray painting their Antifa or Antifa or "Go to hell, Israel," all that kind of crazy shit, on monuments and buildings, and burning American flags in the process of doing all the above. simply refuse their permits for these protests for the safety of America and arrest those that follow through with showing support for terrorist organizations. Simple. There comes a time when we must think outside of the box and understand that allowing this type of disruptive behavior, anti-American and anti-Israel behavior at the same time while supporting terrorism will grow and grow in numbers. They will recruit more and more of our youth to join their terrorist-supporting mission. That's just a fact because they're getting bigger and bigger, bolder and bolder, because there's no accountability. And they're using freedom of speech and our Constitution to cover for their actions. And our Constitution doesn't allow that. There's a fine line of what the Constitution says. And I assure you, from everything I've read about history of our forefathers, and I've read every word of our Constitution, and I supported the Constitution and fought for the Constitution, I assure you that our forefathers did not see or would be okay with anti-American, anti-Israel, death to America type chants, death to Israel, and defacing monuments and public property and setting cars on fire, for instance, as we've seen them do in the past. And then when law enforcement tries to come in and break it up, attacking them. That's not peaceful protesting. That's not what our Constitution meant when it talks about our First Amendment rights. So we will see if there's going to be change. And considering who Donald Trump is putting in charge of the FBI and Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice, I do believe that these little snot-nosed bastards running around college campuses and shouting all this shit, showing support for terrorism, is going to come to a screeching halt really soon. And the fact that this administration, current administration, has allowed this to flourish for 4 years, to include support for members of Congress like Ilhan Omar, Rashid Tlaib, and AOC, it's going to come to a stop real soon. Now, authorities said today that their investigation into an explosion that rattled the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas and killed one person had narrowed in on the decorated U.S. Army soldier, but that key details, including a motive for the incident, remain inclusive. At a news conference, officials said that identification belonging to the soldier, Matthew Allen Lefsberg, was found at the scene where Tesla's Cybertruck burst into flames after an IED explosive was detonated in the truck's bed. They've identified him as 37-year-old Master Sergeant in the U.S. Army's elite 10th Special Forces Group, Green Berets. The Army said Levensberg was assigned to the U.S. Army Special Operations Command and on approved leave from his base. He first entered the Army in 2006, re-entered active duty in December 2012, and was a Green Beret candidate after serving in the National Guard and the Army Reserves. He had a long career, including deployments to the Republic of Congo in 2014, Ukraine in 2016, Tajikistan in 2016, Afghanistan in 2017, 2018, and 2019. The military gave him several awards, including multiple Bronze Star medals, at least one with valor. They go on to say that at this time, this is our FBI. At this time, there is no definitive link between the attack here in New Orleans and the one in Las Vegas. Chris Ria, R-A-I-A, the Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, told reporters during a news conference updating on the investigation to the New Orleans attack. I'll repeat that. There is no definite link between the attacks, New Orleans and Las Vegas. After saying that, the sheriff of the county that Las Vegas is in said not so fast. There are several things in common that need further looking into. They still have not gone through both the Vegas and the New Orleans terrorists' cell phones, laptops, home computers, and emails. So how can the FBI make a statement as such saying they don't believe the two men acted together and knew each other? For instance, both men conducted their acts of terror on New Year's Day. That could just be a coincidence, right? Sure. Both men served not only in the military, but both in the U.S. Army. That could be a coincidence, right? Both served at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Both served in Afghanistan in 2019. Both used the same app called Turo that most of us had never even heard of. We use Uber, for instance, to rent their vehicles for the attacks. And both vehicles just so happen to be electric. Maybe this is all coincidence. But coincidence or not, more investigations need to be done before you start telling people to not look at the shiny object in my right hand, look at the dull-colored rock in my left. Yet the FBI can't seem to understand why they are no longer trusted by most Americans. If you don't have anything factual to put out, just say it's an ongoing investigation and we can't talk about that. I don't give a shit what the reporters ask you. But don't try and make it sound like, oh, there's nothing to see there. President-elect Donald Trump and his incoming administration have talked about, and it's not just recently, when Trump was president the first time, he discussed changing the designation of the cartels south of our border as a terrorist organization. And by doing so would allow us to use our active duty military to track them down and kill them or bring them to justice, since Mexico doesn't seem to be able to control that problem. In fact, most Mexican officials are bought off by the cartel. In interviews with Rolling Stone, many experts express concern and alarm about Trump's plan, as they believe it would be or do little to nothing to stop the supply of drugs pouring into the United States. Caroline Gandler, a professor studying guerrilla and paramilitary violence at American University School of International Services, said that Mexico had already tried waging literally war against the cartels and found the approach to be a failure because it would set off secession fights within the cartel that would lead to an explosion in violence. That's about one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. You have to go back and think of a new strategy, she said. And going to kill the head of cartels is not only a new strategy, but it is the most failed part of the strategy of both sides of the border. Former military officials who spoke with Rolling Stones under the condition of anonymity told Rolling Stones that the plans that have leaked so far remind them of the same strategies that America has used unsuccessfully in the so-called war on terror that was launched after the September 11th attacks. That sounds a whole lot like what we did in Afghanistan for 20 years, unsuccessfully, a former Marine officer tells Rolling Stone. What is the metric that these people are going to use that says, oh yeah, we've achieved a victory? We're not fighting an army. We're fighting poverty. Let's fight desperation. Let's fight hopelessness. It's all over Iraq again, said another military vet who worked on special operations in Iraq. Well, as someone who has been there and done that all over Mexico, Central and South America, as well as the Bahamas in the 80s, I can assure you it can and it does work. It's not Iraq all over again. And if you were not involved with how the U.S. military did counter drug operations, then maybe you should stick to talking about something that you have experience in doing, because this is not one of those operations that you know a damn thing about. Just saying. We did it very successfully before, and we can do it again. The cartel is our enemy. They are a terrorist organization and should be labeled as such. Then all efforts of our military should be utilized to disrupt and cut off their operations of drug trafficking and human trafficking of women and children once and for all. If Mexico can't do it because the cartel pays them off, then we do it because they're affecting America. That border is not controlled by us anymore. It is controlled by the cartels. Ask any Border Patrol agent that question, as I have many times. Something that I've talked about in the past, I'd like to cover with you real briefly. The enigma of drones swarming New Jersey's skies has led to an escalated clampdown on the use of the craft. In recent weeks, many residents have reported sightings of unexplained aerial phenomena across the state. Authorities have moved swiftly to appease public concern, saying that these incidents present no national security risk. Yet, at the same time, telling us that we don't know who's doing it. We don't know where they come from. We know nothing because we're not shooting them down or taking them or getting them in any way, shape, or form. But yet, it's just like this same shit we're watching going on in New Orleans and Las Vegas. Don't look at the shiny object over here. Look at the black rock I have over here. Yet in a move that has stirred speculation, the Federal Aviation Authority, the FAA, has expanded its drone ban. It initially affected 22 local jurisdictions, but has since been extended to an additional 9 areas. Although reports of drone sightings seem to be waning a little, fresh clips of such occurrences across Somerset, Ocean, and Bergen counties keep surfacing online, fueling ongoing intrigue. And the precise reasoning behind the new FAA restrictions remain inclusive. When pressed for clarity, the FAA directed inquiries to the Department of Homeland Security, which then redirected them back to the FAA. Commenting on the matter, an FBI representative said that from around 5,000 log reports, roughly 100 were considered credible. There's 100 reports of drones the size of minivans, which cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, that we don't know who they belong to and how they're coming out of the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, inland, and then going back out there again. Despite the amplified measures of heightened scrutiny, federal officials maintain that the drones do not threaten national security or public safety. John Kirby, National Security Council spokesman, said, "We have not identified anything or any national security concern or public safety risk over civilian airspace in New Jersey or other states in the Northeast." John Kirby has the IQ of this paper. Ocean County Sheriff Michael G. Mastroianni reported that his offices employed their drone to follow a group of unidentified aircraft coming off the ocean, spotted by law enforcement. But their industrial-grade drone fell behind the faster-moving objects. In December, local officials in Ocean County requested a state of emergency declaration so that federal aid could be used to address the drone incidents. The encounter seemed to peak in mid to late December, continuing even with an increased ban on drones. Congressman Jeff Van Drew of New Jersey informed the New York Post that his sources with high clearance in the U.S. government confirmed his concerns that the drones represent surveillance efforts by another country such as China, Russia, or Iran. Van Drew stated, "Something is very wrong here," emphasizing the mysterious characteristics of the drones, which are as sizable as minivans and maneuvering through radar-free zones. He continued, "We've got unidentifiable, sophisticated drones the size of minivans, carefully navigating airspace that is not covered by radar in a very important part of our country, to include military bases. And still, a month later, we somehow don't know anything, other than to say, we don't see a threat." Furthermore, Van Drew criticized the government's placid stance, adding, "We've been told, don't worry, everything's okay." Monmouth County Sheriff Sean Golden also voices concern about public safety and security. Residents are increasingly alarmed by the surge in drone activity after dark, raising concerns about public safety and security. "We cannot wait any longer. The governor must act now, and the National Guard needs to step in to protect our communities." Well, I assure you that in just a few more weeks, well, in days, on the 20th of January, we will have people, adults with intelligence, that care about American citizens and our country and our Constitution and our law enforcement and our military, actively doing things to figure out what the hell is going on here. Everything from the J6 debacle to the assassination attempts on Trump's life, the drones, the terrorist attack in New Orleans, up in Vegas, the mass murders taking place up in New York, and the FBI director himself, Christopher Wray, saying that we are faced with the biggest threat of terrorism that came across our southern border than we've ever had in American history. So we're going to get people that care, that are concerned, that want to be transparent, that want to do something to make America great again. Adults are finally going to be back in charge. Adults that give a damn about you and me. Because sadly, this current administration doesn't give a shit about anything but themselves. Most of the people And you know this to be a fact, whether you're a Democrat or a liberal listening to me tonight, you know this, what I'm fixing to say is a fact. Most of those in leadership positions in this current administration are DEI hires. They weren't hired because of their experience and education. They were hired because of their sexual orientation and gender. And that is a cold, hard fact. And that's how you get people killed. United Airlines, for instance, is very guilty of this. And they don't attempt to hide it. It's on their website. How they will hire people within their DEI compounds. Doesn't matter if you have the most flight hours and the most experience for the job to fly their jet. If you're white male and there happens to be a less experienced and less qualified and less educated member of the LGBT community, or a drag queen, or they're black, or they're Mexican, or they're Muslim, they're going to get hired first to fly airplanes. And guess who else is doing the same thing? The FAA, for air traffic controllers. They're hiring people based on their DEI programs. Well, guess what? Come January 20th, those in charge making those kind of decisions are about to be out of a job, because this DEI is a threat to national security. When it comes to DEI hires for law enforcement positions, for military leadership, for law enforcement leadership running stuff like the FAA or pilots, give me a break. This is absolutely pathetic that we've gotten to this point. This is what happens when you allow far left liberals to infiltrate everything in our country. And it all started with our school system. And it's still going on right now, especially out west, California, Oregon, Washington State, up in places like Massachusetts, New Jersey, any Democrat-led areas where they're more concerned over whether or not you have a strap-on penis or one stuck to your head or a vagina hat, as we've seen, than they are with experience and qualifications. And that is actually a sickness that's infecting this country. And that shit is about to change. Thank God. You had many places to be tonight. You chose to be here with me, and for that, I am forever grateful. I appreciate it very, very much. I'll be back next Tuesday. I hope that wherever you're watching me tonight, whether you're watching me live on YouTube or Rumble or X, formerly Twitter, or LinkedIn, that you will subscribe, share my videos, share my channel with your friends and family. Make sure you tell them if they have little ones that Mr. Doug, every now and then, says a bad word because he's not politically correct. And that's his right. That is covered, by the way, under the Constitution. But there are many things that aren't, that we're seeing happen in this country. Something breaks between now and next Tuesday, I'll do a video about it or a live broadcast about it. Other than that, I hope that whatever you're doing this coming weekend, that you're safe. And you remember that there are people in this country right now, thanks to Joe and Kamala Harris and our southern border, that are waiting to kill you and me. This is serious. It is dangerous. And if you think for 1 second that you can just continue to live inside your little bubble and that nothing's going to happen, well, you should probably seek mental health for that. Because there is shit happening that I don't even talk about because it's above and beyond my pay grade to try and figure that shit out. And the powers that be would come beating down my door if I shared with you some of the things that my friends in higher places in government share with me. And I don't need to go that route. As always, please say a prayer for our men and women serving in the United States military, our veterans, our law enforcement officers, our first responders, their families, our angel families, our blue and gold star families, and our country. May God bless the United States of America. May God bless each and every one of you. Be safe. Thank you for joining me tonight. And I'll see you next Tuesday. Good night, everybody.